So, getting into the nervous system, we have this big overarching thing we call the autonomic nervous system, which basically means these are things that are automatic. We don't have to think about beating our heart. We don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think about digesting or secreting hormones or insulin or any of these things. We automatically do it. The one thing that we can do that the autonomic nervous system does take care of us for it, does take care of for us is breathing. And breathing is our message way from ourselves to the outside world. And it's also a message from ourselves to our inside world. And we'll get more into breathing as we move forward. But there's basically polyvagal theory states that we have three states of our nervous system. So we're pretty familiar with fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system, relax and restore, parasympathetic nervous system. But it kind of branches off even more than that. So our sympathetic nervous system is our activated stress response, that fight or flight. It is, while we think about stress as being bad for us and being in fight or flight is bad, it actually is our biological imperative for survival that we be able to take care of ourselves. So we want the fight or flight function to be available if we have to move our car really quick on the highway or to avoid a kid out in the road or anything like that. So we want to be able to have that functioning. When we have that stress response, our heart rate increases, our blood pressure, breathing, our muscles all contract, our joints contract. Everything that's digesting or sleeping or procreating, all of that stuff kind of goes to the back burner whenever we're meeting a stress, because all of those resources are going to be able to run or fight. And then we can kind of get into this state where we're immobilized in this parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system response, where we have this constant state of low grade stress. So our nervous system was developed eons ago when we were having to live out in the wild, sharing resources with wild animals. Maybe we had a bear we had to run away from, or some other group of people that were trying to get resources from us. We had to be able to meet these threats, and then we had to be able to discharge that energy. And usually if you're running away from a bear, you get away or something else happens, but eventually the threat is over. But when your job is your constant stressor, when every email you open, when every time the phone rings or you hear that particular text happens, or the weather's really bad and you have to think about driving in it, or maybe you have to drive for an hour each way to get to work, and you're constantly at this state of low grade stress, that's where we end up running into trouble. That's where we end up getting stuck. That's where too much adrenaline causes that hypertension, palpitations, shortness of breath, hyperglycemia, because we're secreting sugar to meet that stress response. That the adrenaline is to meet the short-term response. Then we've got cortisol, which also suppresses our immune system and keeps that blood sugar and blood pressure increased, just in case there might be another threat. So the body secretes that adrenaline to meet the initial threat. The initial threat's over, but that cortisol is going to stay high for a while because we're going to be on alert. Just like an antelope that maybe perceives a lion out in the wild, the lion chases them, they run away, they get away scot-free. The lion's finally gone. They stay on high alert for a while before they go back to chomping on grass, without a care in the world. And our bodies react the same way. Then we have the parasympathetic nervous system. When it's healthy, when it's regulated, that's our ventral vagal response. That's when we can relax. That's when our immune system is online, our digestive system is online, our elimination system, our respiratory system, our blood pressure, everything is online. Our hormones are balanced. We can sleep really well because we're not meeting any kind of threat. If we have now, the other aspect of the parasympathetic nervous system is the dorsal vagal. Now, we've got fight and flight, that's a stress response. Another one is freeze or fawn. So if you are out in the wild and there's a lion and you can run fast enough, you will run. If you can fight, you will fight. If you can't do either of those things, you'll curl up in a little ball and you'll play dead. That's freezing. That's a perfectly acceptable way to handle a stress when you're out in the wild. But in our Western culture, it's also how we might handle that. Think about a young child. You're with your parents and maybe they're fighting, or maybe your dad is yelling at you or something like that is happening. You can't fight. You can't really run because you're a kid and you can't take care of yourself. So what do? You freeze, you shut down. And they're seeing a lot of this is, I'm getting off onto a tangent, but ADD is now being looked at as maybe a stress response, freezing and fawning, which is like trying to make everything okay, trying to calm everybody down. You're still not taking care of yourself. You're still in this heightened cortisol level because you want to keep everybody calm. So, like I said earlier, how safe we feel is crucial to our physical health, our mental health, and our happiness. We have to feel safe in our body in order to have this balanced nervous system. And those neuroreceptors in our nervous system, they react instantly. This is not like you can say, okay, I've assessed the situation and I am going to fight. Or, okay, I know I can outrun this guy, I'm gonna run. Or I think maybe the best plan is to freeze. It's not like that. It's not a conscious decision. It is the survival level of our limbic nervous system that says, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. And the nervous system just does it for you. Again, sympathetic nervous system, primitive, biological, meant to protect us. It can become habitual and harmful. Think about somebody who's in fight mode a lot. You might see this perhaps in a boss or a parent or a spouse, somebody who's constantly snapping, somebody who flies off the handle at the drop of a hat, somebody whose reactions are way beyond what the situation demands. Or maybe you're the person who, when you're in a fight, you're like, I'm out of here. I am out the door. I am gonna go to my sister's house. Or maybe you're the person who just freezes and shuts down or tries to people please. This can become habitual and harmful because you're neglecting yourself when you're constantly in one of these modes of stress response. And our bodies are only meant to have these short bursts of stress. Like I said, if we're out in the wild and we've got a threat, or if we're driving our car and we need to avoid somebody on a bicycle, that's when our nervous system, that's when that stress response comes in handy. But we're not meant to be at this constant state of low grade stress, and it will affect all of our body systems. Dr. Gabor Mate is the writer of books such as The Body Says No. He's also an author of a book on ADHD, ADHD, and I can't remember the title of that one. And most recently, The Myth of Normal. And he says that situational factors that contribute to stress are uncertainty, conflict, lack of information, and loss of control. Isn't that what happens when you have a breast cancer diagnosis? Isn't that what happens when you're a human being on the face of this planet? Aren't we all to some degree facing uncertainty, conflict, lack of information, and loss of control? And this whole book that Gabor Mate, which I cannot recommend highly enough, talks about how we're, the bigger picture right now, talking about mental health and drug addiction and gun use and all of these things. If the whole culture is existing with uncertainty, conflict, lack of information, and loss of control, then perhaps that's one of the reasons that we have such an upset in our culture today, why we have so many issues, why we have so many children that and so many people that are unhoused. And I think a lot of it comes down to how much stress everybody is under.